Okay, whatever. That's what that is. And, so that's the thing. They part of the peer reviewed system, right? So that anything that's plant based and says that meat's bad, absolutely come right through. So this whole idea that the literature, there's a study, it's just these people patting each other's back. It's just just an old boys club, glad handing each other and just passing their crap out around the world and perpetuating their and their friends' work to push their own ideologies, make their money, and push their businesses. But it's worse than that. Because why is it that every nutritionist, they say, well, the problem is that doctors don't get taught nutrition in medical school. They don't get taught anything about nutrition. And it's like, thank God for that. Because if they did, it would be this same nonsense that's getting pushed around. There's everything plant-based and meat's evil. At least we have one less thing to decondition and unbrainwash people about and doctors about. And so they already think that meat's bad, fat's bad, and plants are good. Like imagine if that was just hardwired in there, we'd be really in trouble. But why do the nutritionists say this? Why do the nutritionists and naturopaths say that plants are just a divine gift from God, literally? And that's because of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that's not because they corrupted the system. They invented the system. They founded the system. Lena Cooper, Leena Cooper, she was a Seventh-day Adventist Church member in the early 1900s. She was a nutritionist, and she founded the American Nutritional and Dietetics Association. She wrote the first textbook on nutritional sciences taught in universities in America in 1925. It's still in print. The current edition is still being taught, as far as I know. A friend of mine, Sally Norton, has a degree in nutrition from Cornell that she received, I think, back in the 90s. And she was taught out of that book, the 44th edition of Lena Cooper's book. So they founded the nutritional societies. Their cereal companies now fund the Nutritional and Dietetics Associations. The Australian Dietetics Association, their main source of income is sanitarium foods. Guess what sort of diets they promote? Just one guess. Right? The vegan diet. How great is the vegan diet? And I saw their webpage. The vegan diet is super great. It's super awesome. It's super healthy. As long as you just, make sure you just sort of take care of, some of these supplements. You don't really, supplement some of these nutrients below, that's fine. Making off as if it's not that big of a deal. There's a paragraph of different nutrients that they say are lacking or non-existent in a vegan diet. And they're saying, it's such a great diet, but yeah, you have to just take every single supplement under the sun. How can you as a nutritionist advocate for a diet that is lacking in nutrients? It's in the name. You need nutrients as a nutritionist. So you don't get nutrition if there's no nutrients, right? And they're saying, yeah, it's totally fine. It's a great diet, except for all this lack of nutrients. So that's wild. But it's time and time again. So, the WHO had Seventh-day Adventist Church members on it. The McGovern report was written by a Seventh-day Adventist Church member. I don't know if you remember, but back in the 80s, there's a guy named Dr. Pritikin who wrote a book about, about heart disease and like the heart disease diet and all these sorts of things. I don't know when, maybe it was in the 70s he wrote it, but he was a household name in 1984 when I was 4 years old. I certainly know who this guy was. He was one of the first, my earliest memories was knowing who this guy is. And my dad saying, no, he can't have any fat. Dr. Pritikin says, you never want to have fat, blah, 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 blah. And Dr. Pritikin was a professor at Loma Linda Medical Center, and he was an avid reader of Ellen G. White and thought she was just amazing. And I don't know if he was an Adventist church member. However, he did teach at the place that they only allow students who are Adventist church members to go to school at. There's Dr. Gundry, who I actually have a lot of respect for Dr. Gundry. I think he does a lot of good work. He wrote that book called The Plant Paradox, and right up my alley. My podcast is called The Plant Free MD for a reason, because the plants are toxic. We're not designed to eat them, and so they're not appropriate for us. And he says the same thing. He says, look, these plants are toxic. They don't want you to eat them. They have these defense chemicals that harm you, and here's this demonstrable effects that they have on us that are very negative. But it's a paradox, because you're not supposed to eat meat. We all know that meat's bad for you and plants are good for you. We all know that plants are good for you, but they're toxic at the same time. So it's a paradox, right? Well, paradoxes can't exist. That's the definition of a paradox, right? So the reason it's a paradox for Dr. Gundry is because he was a professor of surgery at Loma Linda Medical Center for 17 years. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he was a professor there for 17 years. Does that mean he's a member of the church? Not necessarily. I don't know what they require of their faculty, but they do require of their student body that they be Seventh-day Adventist church members. So it would follow that they would at least need to be on that wavelength, or if not a member in good standing of the church, you would expect. And so either way, strongly affiliated with them, so could potentially be influenced by them. So that's a paradox to him, because plants are all wonderful and great, and you don't want meat, so you have to eat plants. Plants are toxic and they're going to kill you. So it's a paradox. It's not a paradox. They're just toxic and you shouldn't eat them. Meat's great. Problem solved, right?
More fascinating regarding the demonization of meat is now we have these regenerative farmers like Joel Salatin, Will Harris, Gabe Brown, and there's this intersection of climate change and food. So because of climate change, you can't eat meat, right? Because cows fart and methane and all this stuff. But what we're finding in practice is that these regenerative farmers, the cow, okay, so if a meat diet is healthy and if a meat diet reverses disease, the growing of that meat sequesters carbon, heals the land. So meat is not just a dietary solution. Meat is an environmental solution. The cow is the environmental solution to reverse this supposed global warming and this sequestration of carbon. And that's what's really fascinating, is not just is meat the solution for your diet for a healthy body and immune system and mind, but that same cow that produces that meat is the solution to reverse all these environmental ills. And that's what makes it even more fascinating of these paradoxes they try to create, because really they're deconstructing the entire system. Like, for example, this whole plant-based idea, they're not talking really about eating something you're picking out of the garden, right? They're really talking about the plant that they're talking about is the processing plant that is processing all of this GMO soy and GMO corn and then infusing it with seed oils to produce some pea protein bar patented by Bill Gates. And that is your plant-based food that they want you to eat.
Yeah. Or the guys that did Game Changers, I mean, that's the guy who did that was I don't know if I remember his name, but he owns like $140 million worth of a pea protein company. So he said, yeah, you need protein and it's great, but you can't have meat because it's so bad for you. And I just happen to have a solution right here. It's this pea protein bar that I just got. Isn't that great? So I mean, it's just A, it's propaganda, but B, it's just a marketing. It's just a marketing. They're just trying to sell their product, and so they're trying to vilify something that's naturally good for you. They have to convince people that the thing that's absolutely amazing for them, that they naturally want to eat because it is healthy and makes people feel better. They have to convince them that it's bad and to go against their instincts and their nature to eat something that tastes like hot crap warmed over twice, and convince you that that's actually good for you and that you're healthier now. It takes a lot of convincing to do that, and they have been pushing that for a long time. It's getting pretty old. We were talking about the blue zones as another one. The Game Changer was such a joke. I mean, a lot of people have done takedowns of that. It's absolute nonsense. People talk about like, well, it's anecdotal, all these people getting better with carnivore diets. Like, well, it's anecdotes in the hundreds of thousands now. And there are thousands of randomized controlled trials with ketogenic diets, or animal-based ketogenic diets, showing serious improvement in various medical outcomes. So no, that's actually not the case. But what is anecdotal is the Game Changers. They took a couple guys and a couple girls, and they said, oh, okay, eat plants for 6 months. Yeah, oh, I just feel way better now. I was like, oh, I bet you do. You know what they don't tell you is that they had a number of athletes that dropped out of the movie because when they went plant-based, and they were like, no, I'm not doing this. This is crap. And they didn't put that in the documentary. They didn't share that with the class, right? The body or the weightlifter, you know, and look, taking nothing from him. The guy's an Olympian, you know, that's amazing. But his weights went down when he went plant-based. Oh, I'm doing so great now. It's just like, no, the total amount that he lifted at the Olympics when he was plant-based was lower than his last performance, and he weighed more. He actually put on weight, and he lifted less. You know, so that's actually he did worse. You know, and so you know he still went to the Olympics, and so good for him. You know, that's fantastic. But like, I don't think that it helped him. And a lot of the people after the show aired, they all started eating meat again. You know, so it's not great. It's just propaganda, and even if it were, even if every single one of those people got better, it's completely anecdotal. There's like 6 people and they got better. Okay, good for you. Let's try it with 6,000 people and see what happens. But we were talking about the blue zones and that piece of propaganda as well. This guy Dan Buettner went around and went to these different areas and said, "Oh, look, all these people that live the longest, they're all plant-based." Well, no, actually, that's not the case. He lied about that. He was saying that, like in Okinawa, the older group, they barely ever ate meat, and people are living there and saying that's not true. We all eat meat. We actually eat predominantly meat. In fact, my grandparents, who are in their 90s, they eat mostly meat, and they'll have some vegetables and some yams and things like that as well. But they eat a large proportion of that as meat. And they're like, no, it's just the new generation, and they're getting McDonald's and things like that. They're eating that. Well, first of all, McDonald's is not meat; it's predominantly plant-based. You have one little 10 ounce, or not even 10, 1 ounce burger patty. You can't just call that whole meal meat. It's the least amount of ingredients in that whole equation is meat. And so, but he's just, he's just doing the same thing that all those studies did. It's just, pizza's meat, fast food is meat. McDonald's comes in, they started eating meat and everything went bad. Like, no, the meat isn't the problem there. And that. I even saw him on a post. Someone said, like, hey, grass-fed beef is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And he said, well, only 3% of the beef produced is really grass-fed and finished. So I've heard that before, but no one's really eating it. It's like, so you admit that it's good, that there's no problem with it. So there's nothing actually wrong with meat. It's when you adulterate it. That's when it's wrong. So he even admits this, but then he just, he doesn't realize he does that, And so he's a liar. He lies about these things. He lied about that in Okinawa. He lied about that in Sardinia. He went there and said, these guys eat meat maybe once a week. That's it. Well, I had a friend of mine, Professor Bill Schindler, who's a professor of archaeology and paleoanthropology at University of Maryland, now retired. He did a research trip out there, and he found that the same people, we went to the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified. And he said that he met the same people that the blue zone people, Dan Buettner and them, met with. And they were using their study, and they said, why does everybody think we're vegetarian? Like, why does everybody think we're plant-based? Like, and he said that when he was going there, Bill was going there, every single house, they had pigs in the yard, they had chickens, they made their own dairy, and they had charcuterie boards. Every time you came over something, there was just bang, plate of like preserved meats were out there, a bunch of cheeses and all these sorts of things. And they'd have some, they weren't like full carnivores or anything. They did have plants, but it was very largely meat-based. And they'd have some olives, some fresh tomatoes, and some homemade wine, things like that. And basically everything else was meat. And so everywhere they went, they were just being served meat and cheese. And then they were there for a couple of days. He's doing his research and looking into certain things. And then his host that was, showing him around and taking him through there, he said, "Hey, tomorrow we're gonna have meat." And he's just like, "Well, what do you mean?" Yeah, once a week we have meat. And he's like, What do you mean once a week you have meat? We've been eating more meat here than I eat at home. Like, what are you talking about? It's like, no. What I mean is we take a whole sheep, we barbecue it on a spit, and we get all the organs on on spears and rotate them and cook them up. And we just cook meat and hang out and just barbecue and eat meat all day, and they just hang out with their family and their friends, just eating meat for like 9 hours, right? And so that's eating meat once a week apparently, right? But that's how they speak, and that's how they said it. And they said it. I didn't say it. They said it. It's just like, you didn't ask them in Italian, did you? You know, like, so in English they said, yeah, we're eating meat. Once a week we eat meat. We eat the meat. You know, the rest of the week they're eating meat too. They just don't. They just speak about it. Term it slightly different. So it's a complete fraud. He's a complete fraud. And they said, oh, well, Loma Linda, they're all vegetarians and vegans. They live so long. It's like, okay, is that the only defining factor of them? Or are they a religious organization that eschews caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, drugs, slovenly behavior, and affirm family values and a sense of community? All those things are extremely important. And yet, we don't worry about those. Nah, it's just because they're plant-based. But are they plant-based? In fact, the majority of them just eat a normal diet. There's only a small percentage of them that are like hardcore vegan. Now it's a much larger percentage than the rest of the population, but it's not the whole clan, But also there's another population in America that actually lives as long or longer than the Seventh-day Adventists, and which is the Mormons, right? So the Mormons have this same family values. They don't drink. They don't smoke. They don't drink coffee. They don't, they ask people not to use drugs, all these sorts of things. Same things that the Seventh-day Adventists would do, except that they don't have the same dietary restrictions, right? And they actually live as long or longer than the Seventh-day Adventist members in Loma Linda. So why aren't they a blue zone? And why isn't Hong Kong a blue zone when they have the longest life expectancy on Earth right now, as measured as an average from birth? And they eat the most meat per capita of any population on Earth. They eat like nearly 3 times the amount of meat that the average American does, and they live the longest, and they are very healthy in a lot of ways. So why aren't they a blue zone? And the other thing that people don't realize is that he's a liar, and he lied about these things, but B, and cherry picked, and didn't include other areas that absolutely would qualify, should qualify as a blue zone, but just don't fit the narrative. But also, a lot of these blue zone areas, so-called blue zone areas, are actually perpetrators of pension fraud, because they are apparently a lot of these areas were much poorer areas, and typically the poorer areas don't actually have as good health or live as long as more well-to-do areas that have better access to healthcare and better foods and all these sorts of things. And typically they have more access to meat in more wealthy areas. But in any case, so that was a bit abnormal, that these more impoverished areas were living much longer than other areas. But what they found was that there were a lot of people lying about their age. And then when they actually found their official records, they were like, yeah, actually this person wasn't born when they said, but they actually lied about their age to say that they were older than they were, so that they could qualify for pensions, government pensions, earlier, so they could have more money because they were poor. And then people that had been on pensions and had passed away, they just didn't say anything, just had a private burial, didn't tell a teacher, and just kept collecting that check, and so it was pension fraud. And so now a lot of these things are being rolled back, and they're saying, well, actually life expectancy is not as high in these areas. And they're saying, and even Dan said that Okinawa has actually a lower life expectancy than the rest of Japan. And he's saying, well, that's because they're eating more meat now. Like, no, they were eating more meat before. They may be eating more processed food. They may be eating more junk food. That's not meat, and probably would lower their life expectancy. But also when you get accurate data, when you get accurate records, that seems to shift things a little bit as well. So it may be that they never had the life expectancies that he purported that they did because of this fraud as well. So, and funny enough, our friend Dan Buettner sold the rights to the blue zones to the Seventh-day Adventist Church for about $68 million. And so people are saying, it's like, well, who pays? I don't get paid. I just write books and I do speaking events. No, you made tens of millions of dollars pushing this nonsense for your overlords, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And who knows? I don't know if he's a Seventh-day Adventist Church member, but he clearly works for them and he's sold out to them. And he's still pushing this nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And especially when he's saying meat's bad, meat kills you, meat's horrible. And yet we as doctors, clinicians, and patients are using a meat exclusive diet to reverse people's diseases and fix their health. It is so obviously not meat. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And we're running the experiment right now. And we're seeing that if people exclusively eat meat, that their health dramatically improves. They come off medications. They come off blood pressure medications. They come off diabetes medications. They come off autoimmune medications. They come off other medications as well, and they massively improve their life. I see men in their 70s who triple their testosterone levels just by eating meat, and people in their teens. I had an 18-year-old patient that was a bit shorter than average, bit skinnier, tried to work out, wasn't really getting much effect in the gym. We tested his testosterone. It was extremely low. It was older than the 72-year-old guy initially. And if he went to another doctor, he may have gotten another follow-up test and, okay, well, what's going on? And you confirm that. You say, yeah, that's really low. And he would have been consigned to a life of testosterone replacement. He probably wouldn't have had kids because that's going to suppress your sperm production as well. And so he would have been forced to be on medications for the rest of his life. So it's just like bagged another one by the drug companies, and probably may not have ever had kids, and he would have been stuck doing that instead of actually having a functional physiology. I just changed his diet, just put him on a meat only diet. 2 months, his testosterone more than doubled in that time, right? And it's going to keep going up, I would imagine too. So
I'm fascinated by
this is
the speed of the success that people have, and that's what really is concerning when people have all these issues, systemic issues with their health. And if you just try the diet for 2 to 4 weeks, you're going, I mean, proof's in the pudding, right? It either works or it doesn't work. And the fact that it
yeah.
can work so rapidly is just fascinating to me, and why people just aren't more open to it. But they do have to overcome all of this predictive programming and propaganda and just indoctrination of the entire pharmaceutical big ag system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the results speak for themselves. And well, where's your study? There's thousands on a meat-based ketogenic diet. So there's the studies. It's the only diet that has anything close to the amount of rigorous studies applied to it. The plant-based diet has none of these, and none of them to that extent or that rigor. And so the evidence is there. We know that humans are carnivores. That's a biological fact. People are trying to argue that now, which is bizarre to me. They're trying to say that, no, actually we're herbivores. Like, where'd that come from? No serious paleoanthropologist or evolutionary biologist or archaeologist has ever said that. In fact, they've all said the exact opposite. I guess it's all those, cave paintings they found in France of, fresh garden salads and, hoeing, cornfields. I guess that's their evidence. There's nothing like that. There's absolutely nothing. All these cave paintings are just animals. It's just hunting, right? You're never going to find a cave painting of a salad. You're never going to find, salad forks at a dig site. It's mammoth bones dug in with stone axes to just hack off the meat in a very specific pattern that you see when butchering an animal to cut off the meat from the bone. It's a very specific pattern of cut into the bone that you see, and we see this going back millions of years, like 3.3 million years. Who else was using it? We were the only ones with tools, right? So this is something that is just rank denial that they're in. And the problem is that they are convincing people of this, but they're people that clearly want to be convinced because they're not even looking at the other side of the argument. It's something that John Stuart Mill said, that if you only know your side of the argument, then you don't know much. Because if you haven't heard the other opposing side of the argument in its most compelling form from its most compelling arbiter, then you don't even know what the argument is. They could be straw manning you and just say, if you hear it from the people that you trust, if we're all plant-based and we listen to the Dan Buettners of the world and we just listen, oh, well, this is what the carnivores are saying and this is why it's wrong. Well, you don't even know what we're saying then. You know what he says we're saying, and he doesn't know jack. So you have to hear it in its most compelling form. And so when I was doing this as well, when I was sort of digging into the research, going like, holy crap, no, humans are carnivores. That's what I was doing when I was just eating, because I wasn't going to touch plants, because I learned in college and in botany and biology and cancer biology how toxic these things were. My cancer biology professor told us that he wouldn't eat plants, he wouldn't eat salad, he wouldn't eat vegetables, and he wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables, because in his words, plants are trying to kill you. And so I was like, okay, I'm done with those things. And I obviously defaulted into eating eggs and meat because it's just like the only thing that didn't contain plants. And so that's what I did. And then I never felt better in my entire life. My body worked better than it ever had before. I was an athlete like I've never been before. And I looked back on myself like, that's what it was. That's what I was doing. Humans are carnivores, and I was eating as a carnivore. I was living to our biological design, just like every animal on Earth. We have a species-specific diet, and you deviate from that diet, you get sick, just like every other animal on Earth. And that's why there's signs at the zoo. They say, don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick to eat things that they're not designed to eat. Don't feed them the thing that you're eating right now. What was it doing to you? It's going to make them sick. What does it give? What do they get sick with? They get the same things we do. They get diabetes, heart disease, cancer, lupus, Crohn's, all these other sorts of things, right? We get those too. These are non-communicable chronic diseases, and they get that from eating human food. We get it from eating that food too. Dogs and cats get it from eating that food as well, and kibble and plant-based nonsense. But that's not human food. They say you feed animals human food, they'll get human diseases. Well, you've nailed it, right? You already figured out the riddle of the ages, which is the food is causing the disease. But of course, it's not really food, because food is species specific. A Cheeto is not a food to a kangaroo, right? It's not food to a koala. But you know what? Eucalyptus isn't food to a kangaroo, right? And the things that kangaroos eat aren't food to a koala, right? It's species specific. And so this nonsense, it didn't even exist 100 years ago or more. Certainly not human food. What human food is what we've been eating the longest with the best track record, which is meat. And so we need to get back to that and just get back to our basics. And that's what we're doing. You go back to that, and then all of a sudden, all these problems go away. And I saw that. I was just like, okay, just get rid of these plants and do a lot better. And then I was saying, okay, what do we know? What can we prove? Right. And so I started digging into the research, digging into the literature, asking questions of the literature, saying, okay, if this is true, we should be able to see X, Y, and Z. And so I started looking in. I just kept finding things that were pointing in that direction. It's like, okay, well, if this is wrong, we should see these other things, and couldn't find those things. And it's just like, okay, so I was trying to disprove my theory. I just kept finding things that supported it. And then I said, okay, well, maybe I'm missing something, right? Because there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of studies. And so I was like, okay, let me go over to the Dean Ornishes of the world and the Michael Gregors and all these other, plant-based people. And I'll go to their website, see what their arguments are, see what studies they cite. And they were extremely lacking of merit. And there were just all these things. They were just wrapped up in these lies that, saturated fat causes heart disease. Well, no, that's not true. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology published a landmark paper in 2020 looking at all the randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, and other top shelf levels of data. And they found absolutely no association between increased saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease. In fact, they found a protective mechanism, whereas if you ate more saturated fat, you had less strokes, and vice versa. If you ate less saturated fat, people had more strokes. So no, we know that's not true. Well, it causes cancer. Well, no, we covered that one already. Well, it causes diabetes. No, because we're curing it with putting people on a meat diet. and the list goes on. You know, I mean, all these things were based on misinformation, on things that we now know as a matter of record were fundamentally false or fraudulent. And then other things were just flat out lies, that, like, humans were herbivores in the ice ages in the Arctic Circle when there were no plants growing at all. I mean, what the hell kind of sense does that make? I was like, well, but we ate the plant material in the stomachs of the mammoths. First of all, you got to eat through a lot of mammoth to get to the stomach, right? And second of all, how do you know that? How do you know what they were eating? How do you know they were eating the stomach contents of the mammoth? You don't know that. And either way, the vast majority of the mammoth is the mammoth, right? And so you're eating that. And so it's their arguments were just garbage, but I went to the opposing side. I didn't just say, hey, who on my side knows why this guy's wrong? I went to them and I said, okay, what can you tell me? Why am I wrong? And it was not convincing, to say the least. And there was always, you could always see where their flaws were. But they don't do that. They just listen to Dan Buettners of the world and the Dean Ornishes of the world, and they're very convincing. They're very convincing. But but that's because they're looking at these things in isolation, and they're not looking at it in the whole picture.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I know it's really late where you are in Australia, and I appreciate your time. As we wrap up here, maybe you can tell everyone where they can find you and get more of your information, Dr. Chaffee.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure. Well, I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD. That's same as my Instagram and my Patreon. I do early releases and chat groups and things like that there. But most of my stuff just goes up on YouTube. I have a lot of videos there, and so I try to put out stuff pretty regularly. But I also make playlists. So if you're worried about athletics and building muscle, I've got a playlist for that. People are dealing with cancer, I've got a playlist for that. And I've lectured on ketogenic metabolic therapy as an adjunct to standard of care for cancer, for instance. And there's just tons of studies and data on that as well. Randomized control trials, experimental trials on humans and animals showing very, very significant benefits to these dietary changes in the treatment of cancer. That's something I'm very passionate about as well. And then if people are sort of interested in learning more about a carnivore diet, I have a playlist called Getting Started on a Carnivore Diet. And I've sort of truncated a lot of the videos that I think are probably the most important and most interesting, at least in my opinion, to people coming on and learning something new. And if you sort of didn't know any other videos besides these ones, I think you'd have a lot there to go with on not only how to do a carnivore diet, but why to do a carnivore diet, why it matters, and how to sift through the garbage of the agenda against a meat-based diet, and other social media stuff too. But those are the main ones. Oh, and my podcast is just called The Plant-Free MD, and that's available on any podcast channel.
Awesome. Well, y'all, just as a reminder, this is a value for value proposition. If you enjoy our content, please don't forget our sponsors. Check out TheTexasBoys.com. And remember, also, we have a meetup coming tomorrow, Saturday the 4th from 10 to 12 at Grumpy's Garden Center. Also, there is the Exit and Build Land Summit in Bastrop, Texas. That's going to be in a couple weeks. Check out the links below if you're in that area. It is a great event. This is our second year that's going to be there. We're looking forward to that. Dr. Chaffee, thank you so much for coming on the Fearless Podcast. We appreciate your time. And remember, y'all, stay fearless, my friends.